Tonight, as I sit by my fire and reminisce, I got to thinking, wonder if maybe some of you were wondering where this old lady came from that suddenly appeared on the internet. Well, I was born in Pryor, Oklahoma, many years ago to John and Veda Hoos. My dad was a patriot, and when the war broke out, he wanted to go into the service. But they wouldn't take him because he had asthma. So he leased his farm and he set out for Portland, Oregon, where he worked the shipyards to help the war effort. After the war, he went back to the farm. I went to the sale barn with my dad one day and he met an old friend. They went for coffee in the coffee shop. And the fella said, "John, I've known you a long time and you're really good to your animals. I've got to give my horses up. And I've got a mare I'm really fond of. She's a registered quarter horse. And I'll sell it to you for $50. And she's got a 6-month-old colt by her side out of a thoroughbred racehorse. I'll give her to your daughter." Wow, this 11-year-old was ecstatic. Long story short, that horse and I had a great relationship. That colt, we grew up together. When my dad bought a farm in Weber's Fall, and I loved to just go out and ride her in the pasture. I'd call her to the gate, crawl up on the gate, jump on, no saddle, nothing. We'd just take off across the pastures. There was a place there that I used to love, a little brook that ran down, and it was a mossy place with a trees canopy overhead. And I would go up there and ride her, and we'd sit under the trees by the brook, and I'd talk to God. You know, nobody ever told me as a child that you couldn't talk to God and He didn't talk back. We just had, and I had my first job there, as a matter of fact. I went to a little 2-room schoolhouse. I was in the 6th grade. And I got the job as the school janitor. I would go in and clean the floors and start the fires. My dad, of course, in cold weather would take me, but when it was good weather, we had a corral there, and I would ride my horse. Sometimes some of the other children would ride their horses, and we would, at recess, that was one of our pastimes, other than playing softball or basketball. Then my dad again had to sell, and we moved to the city in Muskogee. And he only had a couple acres there, so I had to give up my horse. We sold her to someone who would take good care of her. But I had to have something to do. So I soon got an idea as a 14-year-old, for a newspaper column for the city newspaper. So I went down and talked to the editor, and sure enough, he gave me a job. And that whole school year, I worked as a reporter for that newspaper, and I had about 3 columns in the paper every week. He taught me a lot about journalism, editing, and so forth. Great education for a young person my age. In that summer, I got a job at A&W root beer stand, so I got my service in, got to work in the fast food industry, waiting on people and helping as a car hop there at A&W. I got another idea. One day, when my mother and I were working on washing clothes, and I was helping her run through an old wringer washer. Most of you don't even know what a wringer washing machine is. But we were working over that and running the rinse water and so forth through the tubs. And I got to telling her about an idea I had for a television program. She said, "Well, why don't you go down there to that new television station and share that with them? You never know." I said, "Well, I don't know, Mom." In the spring, I went to the library, and I was kind of skating along on the ice, and I just kind of detoured a few blocks and went into the Channel 8 station there in Muskogee at that time. And I met with Mr. Boyd, the manager. I told him my idea, and I just skated on home on the ice. Then, about 3 weeks later, I get a phone call. Mr. Boyd said, "Could you have about 3 scripts in here next week? We've had a cancellation on a television program for the season, and we're thinking about using your program." Well, I said, "Well, outline do?" He said, "That'll do." So I got him in, and lo and behold, Teen Talks was born. I wrote, produced, and directed that show as a teenager, as a 15-year-old. Had a great time and a great education in live television. Seasons, by the way, we became the most popular show on Channel 8 at that time. I still have some of the letters we got all the way from Kansas. And we had an elderly man from there that used to write to us quite often and encourage us as young people. And as an adult, I've even met some of the people who remembered our shows. But anyway, when that season ended, I had to have another job, never to be bored, even though I was in debate teams and things in school. But I went on to go to work at the Ritz Theater there in Muskogee. Hated to see them tear that theater down. I used to enjoy going under the stage where all the dressing rooms were. They even had one of those drop-down gadgets where you could just drop people off the stage and they could disappear. It was a great theater. But anyway, it was now a movie theater, and I worked in the concession stand. One day as I was at work, this handsome young Marine walked in the door. Well, he's talking to somebody in the lobby, and I said, "Who's that?" Well, the ushers, who thought they were my big brothers, quickly said, "Oh, that's Grandma Ayers. He used to work here, and you don't want to know him." But so much for that warning. He soon came in and started chatting with me and wanted to take me home from work. I said, "Oh, no, can't do that." And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Because I don't know you." And he said, oh, he reintroduced himself with his complete name. And he said, "Now can I take you home?" I said, "No." He said, "Why not?" I said, "Because we have to be introduced by somebody we both know." He said, "Oh, okay, you know my friend I came with?" I said, "Yes." So he ran down, got his friend out, drug him out of the movie, came in, and he said, "Introduce us." Of course he did, and he ran back to the movie. He was missing. "Now can I take you home?" "No." "Why not?" "Well, we got to get to know each other." So he was faithful. He wanted to know this girl. And every day for 2 weeks, he came into the theater and would chat with me between customers. Well, after a couple of weeks, he said, "Can I take you home tonight? This is my last chance." He said, "I have to go back to the base tomorrow." Just happened my dad had put my car in the garage. Well, I called my dad. I said, "Dad, I got a ride home. You won't need to pick me up." When we got to my house, he said, "Will you write to me?" I said, "Maybe." So he got my address, and sure enough, about a week later, I got a letter. I read the letter and threw it over on the piano. My mother and I were very close. As a matter of fact, she read my letters, and I'd share with her when I'd come in from dates. We'd sit around and have a snack, and I'd share what happened on the day. Guys had to be kind of careful because they used to say, "You really tell your mother everything you do on a date?" And I said, "Sure." But anyway, it laid there for 3 weeks, and she finally said to me one day, "Are you ever going to answer that soldier's letter?" And I said, "Oh, maybe." She said, "Shame on you. Here he's out there serving his country, and you won't even write to him." Well, little did she know what she started, because I finally answered that letter. And then the letters got closer and closer together, and we shared more and more through the mail. Yes, you didn't call and get on the phone like they do today. But anyway, long story short, about little less than 2 years later, we were married. And we went on to have our family, children and grandchildren. I spent 60 years with one of the most wonderful men in the world. I get sidetracked there, back to the times and what I started to talk about on this whole video. I wanted to talk about service. Our Pearl of Wisdom today is going to be about service. You know, servitude or serving other people is something we don't see very much anymore. I don't even think some in this younger generations understand what service is. You know, when I was young, you would go to the gas station, you'd pull up, and an attendant, usually a young man, would come out and he'd pump your gas, then he'd wash your windshield and check your oil, all those things for you. And you know what the nice thing was? Other than the fact that as the girls, we'd go out driving my car, we'd dig around in the seats to try to find a quarter to buy gas. You could add a couple of pennies to that, and you could get a gallon of gas. We haven't seen those days in a long time, have we? But back to the attendant. He would wait on you, and he'd get your gas. And you know, it didn't matter if you were royalty. You didn't have to be royalty. You didn't have to be rich. It didn't matter if you were a waitress or the bank president. You got the same service. And it was a great time. It benefited both parties. We got our gas pumped. We got our windshields washed, etc., and our liquids checked in the car. And then the young man got a responsible job, and he learned responsibility, and he got paid. So that's what service is about. In the Holy Scriptures, Jesus talks about service. You know, in Mark 9, he talks about those who would be the greatest would serve others. Also in Matthew and Luke and all throughout the Scriptures, Jesus taught us to be servants. He said if you wanted to be his disciples, you would love one another. And to love people, we need to be a service and want to help them. Well, you know, you don't see it a lot, but we have a young couple in our church that have 3 children, and they are the most serving family. So it's still around today, but not always. We need to pursue that. You know, Jesus gave us an example to serve others. We need to learn to serve in order to find purpose in our life and follow Jesus' example. Thank you for watching. Be sure and like, hit the subscribe button, and tune in again when we might have a chat, or we might have Trixie and friends on, or we might have 2 old ladies traveling across country. You never know. Tune in to Grandma Ayers' Pearls of Wisdom. Thanks for watching. Good night.